The thing in my hand blinked at me. Not metaphorically. It had 3 eyelids, 1 horizontal, 2 diagonal, and all of them opened in slow, wet sequence while I stood behind the bar holding it like I had any idea what it was. It was warm. It smelled like copper and pine sap. Its skin, if that was skin, pulsed faintly orange. I set it down. It left. I wiped my hand on my apron and picked up the next item on the orientation checklist. Quelix, my station manager, 6 limbs, body like a deep-sea squid that had learned ambition, shifted color from calm green to what I had learned in the last 40 minutes meant mild disapproval. He did not have a mouth in any location I had found yet. His communication came through color shifts across his mantle, and when color was insufficient, through a small translator device clipped near what I was choosing to call his shoulder. The translator said, "That was a guest." It was on the prep shelf. Guests sometimes rest on the prep shelf. You will learn to check. I wrote that down. Actual pen, actual paper. The Neuralink upload had failed twice during boarding because my baseline human stress hormones apparently read as a system error to the station's biometric intake software. The intake officer, a tall gray creature with 7 fingers on each hand, had stared at my cortisol levels like they were a bear standing in a kitchen. Which, to be fair, was a thing I had also experienced. Bears in the kitchen were a Yellowknife reality. You learned to work around them. I was starting to think this place was going to be the same kind of problem. The tessellated meridian floated in neutral space between 3 territorial boundaries, which meant it was legally claimed by none of them and practically claimed by all of them. It ran on Galactic Hospitality Union Charter, which was either a very prestigious organization or a very old joke. Quelix's color shifted evasively when I asked. The bar served 14 sapient species on any given night, operated across 3 gravity variances, and had a section of the floor that was technically sovereign territory belonging to a species called the Vreth, which meant that section of flooring had its own legal standing, and I was not, under any circumstances, to spill anything on it. Not liquid, Quelix said. Not food, not attitude. What counts as spilling attitude? His color went a complicated amber. The translator took a moment. Eye contact held longer than 2 seconds. Breath exhaled with force, standing with weight on both feet equally. I looked down at my feet, shifted my weight. Good, he said, you learn. The orientation continued. The bar had 4 service zones. Zone 1 was standard mixed species, manageable, the kind of environment I could navigate in my sleep after 6 years behind various counters in northern Canada. Zone 2 operated under reduced gravity, drinks poured differently there, arcing in slow curves, and I would need to adjust my technique. Zone 3 was temperature-controlled for species that existed comfortably at -40, which was also, incidentally, a temperature I had personally experienced while waiting for a bus, so I was less concerned about that one. Zone 4 was the Vreth corner. I did not have clearance for Zone 4. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Quelix communicated in a particular shade of gray that suggested the question was not worth asking. The cocktail napkins were the part that got me. They were stacked neatly at the service end of the bar, small, square, white with a faint iridescent edge. Standard. I picked one up without thinking, and Quelix went a color I had not seen before, something between red and a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. Those, the translator said, are diplomatic documents. I looked at the napkin. The napkin looked like a napkin. They are printed with the station's jurisdictional seal, Quelix continued. Placing one beneath a beverage constitutes a formal gesture of neutral hospitality under Union Charter. Handing one to a guest has, in 3 recorded instances, resolved territorial disputes. Losing one has, in 1 recorded instance, started a minor conflict. I set the napkin down with the care I normally reserved for things that were alive. And I'm supposed to use these. For every drink in Zone 1 and above, yes. I looked at the stack, looked at the bar, looked at the Zone 4 section of floor, which was a slightly different shade of material than the rest of the station, and had a faint marking at its edge that the translator in my earpiece identified as something between a property boundary and a warning sign. My left hand found the edge of the counter, the scar across my palm pressed flat against the cool surface. Old habit, grounding thing. I had taken this job because the posting said multi-species environment, off-world placement, no prior xenological experience required. It had not said anything about diplomatic napkins or guests sleeping on the prep shelf or a section of floor with legal personhood. It had said competitive salary, flexible hours, and housing provided. The housing was a bunk in a converted storage unit that smelled like something had previously fermented in it. The salary was paid in 3 different currencies, one of which was not technically currency, but a promise of future goodwill from a species that communicated exclusively in long-term commitments. The hours were whatever hours the station needed. I had said yes to all of it without a second thought, which probably said something about the state of my options back home. I chose not to examine what it said too closely. Quelix finished the orientation with the most important rule, which he delivered in a flat, direct color that the translator rendered as formal tone. The Vreth come on the 4th station night of every cycle. They will test you. Not aggressively, it will not look like aggression. It will look like ordinary behavior, a glass near the edge, a drink ordered in the dialect you do not yet know, a long silence that expects something. They test every new staff member. Most last 2 or 3 cycles before requesting reassignment. What makes someone last longer? His color shifted, something warm in it, almost fond, though I may have been reading that wrong. They stop waiting for it to be easier, he said. They just keep working. I nodded. That I knew how to do. The first guests arrived in 1s and 2s at the beginning of the service period. A unit of time the station measured differently than Earth did, about 11% longer than a standard hour, a fact I had learned by being late to my own first shift by what my internal clock told me was 7 minutes. Quelix had been a very specific shade of unimpressed. I got behind the bar and I worked. The drinks were the part I trusted. 6 years of muscle memory kicked in regardless of what was in the glass, regardless of whether the glass had a conventional shape, regardless of whether the guest had a hand or a limb or something that functioned as both. I watched, I adapted, I poured. A creature with no visible face ordered something that required sound as an ingredient. I used the tone emitter on the bar's underside, which I had found during setup, and investigated purely out of curiosity. It worked. The creature's body language, whatever that meant for a creature without visible features, changed into something that felt like surprise. As Siveth arrived, near the end of the first hour. She was one of the regulars Quelix had mentioned, a species called the Ven, herbivores, soft-bodied, with iridescent frills along their collarbones that shifted color the way Quelix's mantle did, except faster and with more emotional transparency. Siveth's frills were the conversational equivalent of a person whose face gave everything away instantly. She settled at the bar. Her frills were a gentle, curious yellow. "You are the human," she said. Her translator was built into a delicate piece of jewelry at her throat. Her voice, underneath the translation, sounded like water moving over smooth stone. "I am," I said. "What can I get you?" "I would like to know first," she said, "what it is like." I was already reaching for her usual. Quelix had given me a regulars list, a pale, cold drink that smelled like rain. I poured it without looking, slid it exactly into position. What is like," I said. "Living on a world that wants you dead." Her frills pulsed a curious, slightly odd orange. "I have read the entry, Class 7 Deathworld. The register lists 43 distinct categories of environmental hazard on your primary continent alone." I thought about that. The drink was already in front of her, I picked up a cloth and started on the counter. "You get a good eye for what's about to go wrong," I said, "and you learn to keep moving while it does." Her frills went a color I had never seen a frill go, something deep and luminous, like the blue at the very bottom of a clear lake. They held that color for a long moment. I kept wiping the counter. Quelix drifted past behind me. His translator murmured quietly near my ear. "That color," he said, "means sacred awe. It is a significant response, you should know." "Is that good?" I said. "It means she thinks you are holy." I considered that while I finished the counter. "Cool," I said. Then from Zone 4 came a sound. Not a voice, not a word. A sound low and rhythmic, like something very large and very structural settling its weight, like a building deciding to stand somewhere different. I looked up. The Vreth did not enter a room so much as the room became aware of them. 3 of them. They moved through the main entrance in a single line, each one close to 9 feet, their exoskeletons the color of old ivory, their claws, actual bone, curved and ridged and clicking faintly with each step, hanging at their sides with the casual ease of something that had never needed to rush. The bar went quiet, not all at once, in sections like a wave moving backward from the door. I set down the cloth. I looked at them. I looked at the Zone 4 section of floor with its legal personhood and its warning boundary marking. I looked at my checklist, still sitting on the prep shelf. I picked up the cloth again. I kept wiping. One of the Vreth looked at me, not at the bar, not at the room, at me specifically, with eyes that sat deep in the bone structure of its face like something that had learned patience by outliving everything impatient. I wiped the counter. It looked away. Good, I thought. That was step 1. Whatever step 2 was, it was probably coming on the 4th station night of the cycle, and I had 4 nights to figure out how to be ready for it. I picked up the diplomatic napkins and started setting them under glasses. I had a job to do. The Vreth advance party came back the next night, and the night after that. They did not order anything. They sat in Zone 4 in their section of the legally sovereign floor, and they existed in that particular way very large and very old things exist, like the room was something that had happened around them rather than something they had walked into. Their claws clicked against the edge of the tables. Occasionally one of them would look toward the bar, not at the drinks, at me. I worked. That was the thing about this job, the thing I had not expected. I was good at it. Not good in the way of someone who had studied xenological hospitality or trained in alien cultural protocols, or done any of the preparation that the job posting had suggested but not required. Good in the way of someone who had spent 6 years in environments that did not care whether she was comfortable, who had learned to read a room full of humans who had stopped being reasonable 3 hours ago and were now something more volatile, who had developed a pore so controlled that it had become automatic, not a skill, just a fact of her hands. The alien clientele did not know what to do with me. That became clear by the second night. Clear in the way things become clear when 12 different species stop their private conversations to watch a human free pour a tri-density cocktail into a vessel that required the liquid to enter from 3 different angles simultaneously. I had figured out the tri-density cocktail during the prep hour by taking the instruction manual apart and rebuilding the logic from first principles. The manual was written for a species with 4 hands. I had 2. The result was unorthodox. It worked. The creature I poured it for, a regular named Ovith, broad, quiet, with a kind of dense stillness that made him look like a boulder that had learned to order drinks, stared at the glass for a long moment. Then he made a sound I could not categorize. Quelix's translator murmured near my shoulder. That sound means, approximately, that you have done something correctly that should not have been possible. The manual was wrong, I said. The pour sequence was backwards. Quelix went a thoughtful blue. The manual has been the same for 11 years. The manual was still wrong. He was quiet for a moment, then, "I will have it corrected." The other staff noticed. There were 7 of us total, Quelix managed. And then there was Pren, a small, quick creature who handled Zone 2 with a kind of cheerful determination. Iveth, tall and careful, who almost never spoke but whose work was flawless. A pair of beings called the Dull who functioned in tandem, finishing each other's tasks the way some people finish each other's sentences. And a new hire from a water-world species whose name I could not pronounce, and who I had taken to calling, internally, Finns. Finns was also new. We had an unspoken solidarity. They watched me the way people watch someone on a tightrope. Not hostile, not rooting against me, just watching with the particular quality of attention that meant they were waiting for something. I knew what they were waiting for. The Deathworld Register, the galactic catalog of planets classified by environmental lethality, had a public-facing index, and my coworkers had clearly looked up Earth. I knew because Pren had asked me, on the second night, with genuine curiosity and no particular tact, whether it was true that my planet had insects large enough to carry small animals. I confirmed that this was true. Pren's entire body shivered. He then asked whether I had personally encountered such insects. I said yes regularly, and that the correct response was to stay calm and move slowly. Pren stared at me for a very long time. After that he started bringing me the better cuts of the prep ingredients without being asked. I chose not to examine why. The regulars reacted to me in stages. First there was confusion. I was small, visibly unarmored in any structural sense, and I carried no visible indicators of threat capability. For a solid quarter of the first week, multiple guests asked Quelix if I was a decorative installation. Quelix, to his credit, answered with a color that the translator rendered as dignified neutrality. Second came the unease, which arrived the moment anyone accessed the Deathworld Register mid-drink. I watched it happen in real time on the third night. A table of 4, some kind of academic species with long, careful fingers, and the look of people who read everything. One of them pulling up a screen, all of them going quiet in a specific sequence that ended with all 4 of them looking at me with expressions I could not read. One of them left their drink unfinished. That almost never happened. Third came the fascination. This was the stage that generated conversation. Siveth came back every night. She sat at the bar and she asked questions, and I answered them the same way I did everything, plainly, without drama, while keeping my hands moving. She asked about the cold, and I told her about Yellowknife in February, about the way the air crystallized inside your nostrils if you breathed through your nose, about the 40 below nights when your car door froze shut, and you learned to just accept that you were walking. She asked about the animals. I told her about the time a moose stood in the parking lot of a grocery store for 4 hours and refused to move and the entire town just worked around it. She asked what a moose was. I described it. Her frills went through 7 colors in rapid sequence. And it simply stood there, she said, for 4 hours. And your people simply continued. What else do you do? Her frills held a soft, wondering gold. We would have evacuated. We had groceries to buy. She looked at me the way people look at something they are trying to fit into a framework that does not have a slot for it yet. You are all like this, she said, your whole species. I thought about that, poured a drink, slid it to the guest at the far end of the bar without looking up. We have our moments, I said. It was on the 4th night. The cycle night Quelix had warned me about that the real test arrived. I heard it before I saw it. Everyone heard it before they saw it. The sound started outside the main entrance, that same low rhythmic weight of something structural settling, except this time it was larger, more of it. The advance party had been 3. This was different. This was 1. One breath, and the sound it made coming down the corridor was the sound of a thing that had won every argument it had ever entered simply by continuing to exist through it. Krathvel walked through the door and the room did not go quiet. The room went empty. Not physically, everyone stayed in their seats, but some quality of the air changed. Some ambient noise of conversation and movement and living that I had stopped noticing because it was always there. It dropped away completely. He was bigger than the advance party, not by a small margin. His exoskeleton caught the light and held it in the way old bone holds light, dense and particular. His claws were different from the others, shaped at the tips with an additional curve that caught attention without demanding it. He moved to the Zone 4 section, settled into the primary seat, the one position to see the entire bar, every exit, every staff member, and he was still. The Fen liaison, who had materialized at some point near the service corridor and was pretending to check inventory while very clearly monitoring the situation, caught my eye. His expression, filtered through the translator, carried a single word. Ready. I was already moving. Not toward Zone 4, not yet. I moved through my regular service pattern, 2 drinks to the table near the gravity variance edge, 1 refill for Siveth, who was sitting very quietly with her frills tucked, a quick check on the prep shelf, and I let him sit. Let the room recalibrate. Let the air settle back into something breathable. Then I walked to the edge of Zone 4. 2 steps from the boundary, far enough, respectful of the legal standing of that particular stretch of floor. "Can I get something for you?" I said. Krathvel looked at me. I had learned to hold eye contact for up to 2 seconds. I held it, exactly 2. Then I moved my gaze to a neutral point, the edge of the table, which was the hospitality protocol Quelix had drilled into me. The silence lasted long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. Then the translator in his collar, expensive, military-grade, spoke. "The drink that costs more than your life," it said. "Bring it, do not flinch." Crystalline sorrow. I knew the drink. Quelix had walked me through it during orientation the way someone walks you through an emergency procedure, carefully, without rushing, with the specific tone of a person who hopes you never need to use the information but knows you probably will. 11 years fermented. A living culture of bioluminescent organisms from a deep ocean world, sealed in a dark glass vessel no larger than a standard wine bottle, their natural light compressed over a decade into something that glowed from within like a trapped star. The pour required a specific temperature, a specific motion, a specific vessel, a hand-blown glass, each one unique to this bar, each one worth more than my annual salary. The cost of a single serving exceeded the resale value of the shuttle that had brought me to this station. It was also technically a drink order. "Any preference on the glass?" I said. The silence that followed had texture to it. Then his secondary mandibles, the smaller set, inward-facing, rarely extended, opened slightly. The translator tagged this as ambiguous, laughter, threat, or the vreth equivalent of a period at the end of a sentence, meaning simply that something had concluded. "Surprise me," the translator said. I went back to the bar. Quelix was the color of barely contained alarm. He said nothing. He moved out of my way. The bottle of crystalline sorrow lived in a locked cabinet below the main bar, behind a biometric seal that required 2-staff verification. Quelix pressed his limb to the second pad without being asked. The cabinet opened. The bottle sat in its cradle, and even in the cabinet's dim interior its light was visible. A soft, moving luminescence, faintly blue, faintly green, shifting the way something shifts when it is alive. I lifted it with both hands. It was warm. Not hot, not uncomfortably warm. The warmth of something that had been alive for 11 years and was not done yet. I held it the way you hold things that matter, not tight, not loose, with the full attention of both hands and the part of my brain that had learned, through repetition, that some things required being fully present. I chose the glass. There were 6 options. I chose the one with the widest base and the narrowest neck, the most forgiving geometry for a poured luminescence, the one that would show the drink's interior light best in a low-light environment. I set it on the bar. I positioned it. I poured. The pour for crystalline sorrow was not a standard motion. It required a slow, tilted arc, the bottle rotating slightly as it poured to keep the living culture distributed evenly, the light moving through the glass as it filled, not all at once, but in progression, like watching a tide come in. I had practiced it. In the prep room with water, 6 times, until the motion was in my arms and not in my head. The glass filled. The light settled. I placed the glass on the tray. Left hand under the tray, flat, scarred palm against the surface. Right hand at the edge for balance. I looked at Zone 4. I walked. The thing about carrying something irreplaceable is that your body knows. Not in a dramatic way. Not in the way stories describe it, with sweat and trembling and a rushing sound in the ears. In a quieter way. A kind of heightened attention that lives in the hands, in the feet, in the precise calibration of each step. The tray was steady. I made it steady. Not by gripping harder is how things spill, but by breathing evenly, by keeping my shoulders level, by treating each step across that floor as the only step currently happening. The Zone 4 boundary marker was a change in the floor material, slightly different texture. I felt it through the soles of my shoes. I crossed it. The Vreth at the corner tables, the advance party from the previous nights, did not move. They watched. That was all. The watching had weight to it, not hostile weight, not the weight of something about to happen, but the weight of witnesses. They were paying attention the way things pay attention when something that might be significant is occurring, and they want to be able to say afterward that they were present. I kept walking. Krathvel was watching me. Not the drink. Not the tray. Me, with those deep-set eyes that had the patience of something that measured time in decades, that had seen enough things arrive in front of it to know that arrival was not the interesting part. The interesting part was what happened after. I reached the table. 3 feet away. 2. I began the service motion, the controlled lowering, tray-level glass leading, the specific angle that placed a drink on a surface without sound. His claw came down on the table. Not at me, not at the tray, beside it, between the tray and the table edge, close enough that I felt the displaced air. The claw was longer than my forearm. The tip of it rested against the table with a sound like a key turning in a very old lock. A test. Not aggression. A test. The distinction mattered, Quelix had told me, and I had believed him, and I had told myself I believed him, and now, with the claw 6 inches from my left hand, I discovered whether believing and knowing were the same thing. They were not quite the same thing. My left hand wanted to move. Not a dramatic impulse, just a small, animal, reasonable desire to put itself somewhere that was not next to something that could take it off at the wrist. My left hand had its own opinions, developed over years, and its opinion right now was clear and strong. I thought about Yellowknife, about the grocery store parking lot, about the moose. You do not move, you work around it. My hand did not move. I set the glass down. The crystalline sorrow caught the bar's ambient light and held it, the living culture inside shifting in its slow pattern, blue to green to something without a name, and the sound the glass made against the table was barely a sound at all. 11 years. Not a drop. The Fen liaison appeared at my shoulder approximately 4 seconds later. He had moved from the service corridor to the bar's neutral zone with the speed of someone who had been waiting, tensely, for a specific outcome. I need, he said very quietly, to explain something to you. I had walked back to the bar. I was cleaning the tray. My hands were steady. I was paying a great deal of attention to the tray. The Vreth, he said, have a formalized structure for encounters between dominant-class individuals and service-class individuals. It is ancient. It predates their space travel. It predates written language. The structure is based on the assumption that service-class individuals, when placed in proximity to a dominant-class individual under conditions of threat or pressure, will show visible signs of yielding, movement, posture change, Broken eye contact before the appropriate moment. I read the 2-second rule, I said. The rule you followed is a union guideline. What Krathvel performed was not a union guideline. It was a breath dominance assessment. Claws on surface, proximity to a subordinate's primary working limbs, pressure applied without contact. He paused. You did not yield. I set the drink down. Yes, you set the drink down, without yielding. Another pause, longer this time. In Vreth cultural structure, completing a service act under direct dominant class pressure without displaying subordination signals is not the behavior of a service class individual. I looked up from the tray. What does it signal? He looked at me the way people look at a situation they have no protocol for. It signals rank, he said. Unregistered rank, unknown rank. The Vreth dominance ledger will need to record you. He straightened slightly. I should tell you that this has not happened with a non-Vreth individual in the ledger's entire history. I set the tray down. I picked up a cloth. Is that good or bad? I said. It means, he said carefully, that Krathvel will not harm you. It also means that every Vreth who has access to the ledger will know your name and your species by morning cycle. I thought about that, wiped the counter. Cool, I said. He waited, clearly expecting more. I kept wiping. The bar's ambient sound had come back in. Conversations restarting, movement resuming, the quiet percussion of a functional room doing what functional rooms do. Siveth was at the bar again. She had returned to her seat with the silent speed of someone who had been watching from a careful distance, and had now decided the distance was no longer necessary. Her frills were that deep lake-bottom blue again, held steady, not flickering. Quelix drifted up behind me. He did not speak. His color was something I had not seen from him before, deep and layered, a blue-green that moved slowly, like water over stone. I had no word for it. Later I would ask him what it meant. He would take a long time to answer. He would say the closest translation was, I did not expect this and I am glad. For now, he simply moved to his station and began the next service cycle. I picked up a set of diplomatic napkins. I placed them under drinks. At Zone 4, Krathvel lifted the crystalline sorrow and drank. His claw rested flat on the table, not raised, not positioned. Flat, which the Vreth advance party, all three of them now shifted in their seats to a subtly different orientation, something I could not name but could feel registered with a stillness that meant something I did not have the language for yet. I would learn the language. But that was later. For now I worked. 3 months after the night of the crystalline sorrow, the tessellated meridian had a 2-hour wait for seating on cycle nights. This was new. Quelix tracked station metrics the way other people tracked weather, with constant, low-level attention and an expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by the rain but still noticed it. He showed me the numbers on the 4th morning of my 2nd month. Occupancy up 31%. Return visits from Vreth-adjacent species that had historically avoided stations where Vreth were known to frequent, up 60%. New guest registrations from 14 species that had not previously held meridian accounts up by a number that Quelix's color language rendered as something like startled gratitude. They want to sit in Zone 4, he said, not accusatory, almost wondering. Not the Vreth, the others, they want proximity to the zone. To see if anything happens, I said. Yes. Nothing will happen. They do not know that. That is precisely the draw. He paused. The color at his edges was a thoughtful amber. You have made this station into something it was not before. I am still determining what that is. I was stocking the prep shelf. I checked each item before I shelved it, a habit I had developed after the first night, when one of the items had blinked at me. It's still a bar, I said. That part hasn't changed. The part of it that is a bar, he said carefully, is perhaps the smallest part of what it currently is. I chose not to argue with that because I had been watching it happen, and I did not entirely disagree. The Vreth trophies started arriving on the sixth cycle. Small tokens, fragments of exoskeleton, which among the Vreth were a significant material because they shed and regrew their outer casing every several years, and a fragment given voluntarily was a record of a witnessed moment, an acknowledgement. The first one appeared at the edge of the bar on a morning when I was setting up alone, left with no ceremony, a piece of pale ivory material no larger than my thumb, positioned with a precision that said it had been placed, not dropped. I held it in my right hand for a moment. Then I put it behind the bar. The second came the next cycle, the third the cycle after that. By the end of the second month there were 9. I had lined them up along the back shelf, between the expensive bottles and the specialized equipment, and they caught the bar's light in a way that was hard to ignore, pale and smooth, each one subtly different, each one from a different member of the Vreth contingent. As Siveth looked at the shelf on the night, the fifth one appeared. Her frills were a quiet, considering gold. "Do you know what those mean?" she said. "I have some idea," I said. "They are calling you witnessed," she said. "In the Vreth structure, that is a category, a permanent category. It means that an individual's behavior has been observed by a dominant class member under conditions of pressure, and the observation has been found significant." Her frills shifted. "They do not give those to members of their own species often." "I know." "You do not seem surprised." I was pouring a drink, a new one I had developed in the second month, a layered cold serve for the Ven species that tasted, as Siveth had informed me, like early morning and distant rain. I had not known what that meant when she said it. I had adjusted the formula 3 times until her frills went the color that meant right. "I'm a little surprised," I said honestly. "Are you glad?" I set the drink in front of her, placed the diplomatic napkin with the care those documents deserved. "I don't know yet," I said. "I'll tell you when I figure it out." She wrapped both hands around the glass. A gesture I had learned meant something like thank you in Ven body language, holding something given to you with both hands, and she did not push further. That was one of the things I had learned about Siveth and about the Meridian in general. The people here were patient with not yet answers. They had time. They understood that some things resolved on their own schedule. Pren, who had graduated from bringing me better prep cuts to actively defending my work methods to any new staff member who questioned them, had taken to explaining me to newcomers with a concise authority that I found both touching and slightly alarming. "She is from a Class 7 Deathworld," he would say, as though that explained everything. And apparently to everyone but me, it did. Iveth, tall, careful, almost never speaking, had started, on the 32nd night, placing drink orders in front of me before I could reach for them, moving with a quiet efficiency that said she had been watching my patterns long enough to anticipate them. I had watched that happen and not mentioned it. She had watched me not mention it and not mentioned it either. We understood each other without the inconvenience of conversation. The dull had adopted a habit of completing whatever task I was furthest behind on, which they did without acknowledgement and without expectation of acknowledgement. The first time it happened, I had looked for who to thank and found them already doing something else, their tandem motion carrying them smoothly to the next task like a single organism with very good coordination. Finns, whose actual name I could now nearly approximate if I tried, had confided in me during a slow prep period that she had almost requested reassignment after the first cycle. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "I watched you," she said. Her translator gave her voice a slightly liquid quality that I had stopped noticing weeks ago. "I thought, if the small, soft Deathworld person is staying, I can stay." I considered that. "That's either a compliment or a very low bar," I said. "Yes," she said, with the comfortable certainty of someone who did not see those as different things. Crathvell returned on the first night of the third month. Alone. No advance party this time. No sound in the corridor announcing him. He moved with a quietness that was somehow more significant than the noise had been, as though he had chosen to arrive without announcement, and the choice itself meant something. He did not go to Zone 4. He sat at the bar. The entire room recalibrated without making it obvious they were recalibrating. Conversations continued. Drinks were consumed. But the quality of attention in the room shifted, became a degree more present, more focused on the bar's end, where a 9-foot Vreth warlord was settled on a bar stool that had not previously seemed like a thing he would ever consider using. I finished the order I was filling, set it on the tray for Pren to run, walked to the bar's end. 2 seconds of eye contact, neutral point. "What can I get you?" I said. The translator in his collar was silent for a moment. Then, "Water," it said, "human temperature." I looked at him for just a moment past the 2-second rule. Not long, not rude, just a beat. "You looked it up," I said. "I looked it up," he confirmed. I poured the water. No ceremony, no careful presentation. A glass of water set in front of him, because ceremony for its own sake was performance, and he had not come here for a performance. I placed the diplomatic napkin. He looked at the napkin. Something in his face moved, not an expression I could read, more a small shift in the architecture of how he was holding himself. "I am told," his translator said, "that those are diplomatic documents." "They are. And you place them under all drinks." "Under all drinks in zones 1 through 3, I said. "Yes." "Including," he said, "mine." "Including yours." He was quiet for a moment. The water sat between us, a glass of something completely ordinary in a bar that had stopped being ordinary some time ago. "We have a word," he said. The translator paused, doing something I had not seen it do before. It paused the way translators pause when they are working on something that does not have a direct equivalent. "In our language, for a thing that stood under a claw and did not move. We use it for mountains, for the deep places of oceans, for things the world tried to break and found that it could not." I looked at him. "We use it for those things," he said, "and for one other category. For individuals who perform an act of service under conditions of dominance without yielding and complete the act without error." He picked up the water. "I have entered your name in the ledger under this word." I thought about that, about the prep shelf and the diplomatic napkins and the crystalline sorrow in its dark glass and the claw on the table 6 inches from my left hand. "What does the word mean?" I said. "Exactly." The translator considered. "Exactly," it said. "It means a thing that held." I picked up my cloth. I started on the counter. "Thank you," I said. He drank his water, human temperature. He had looked it up. After that I worked the rest of the service period the same way I worked every service period, steady, present, hands always moving, eyes tracking the room. The Vreth tokens on the back shelf caught the light, 9 pieces of pale material, each one a record of a moment that had been witnessed and deemed significant. The diplomatic napkins went under the drinks. The crystalline sorrow bottle was returned to its cabinet, biometric seal engaged. At the end of the shift I stayed behind to do the final restock. Everyone else filtered out. Quelix did his last check, shifted into a color that I had learned meant see you next cycle, and left. The room went quiet in a different way than it was quiet when full, emptier, with the particular stillness of a place that had held a lot of living and was now resting. I wiped down the bar, straightened the bottles, checked the prep shelf, checked it properly, each item examined before it was touched, because some of them had eyelids and opinions. I reached under the bar. Behind the spare napkins, the extra translator batteries, the station emergency manual that I had read twice because it was the kind of thing I read, there was an envelope, standard issue, white, Sealed, except not actually sealed. I had sealed it with the adhesive strip and then peeled it back open 4 times and repressed it, and by now it held closed through habit rather than chemistry. It had a name on it and an address, both from before. I held it in my scarred hand. The bar was quiet around me, the quiet of a place that had become, without my planning it, a place I came to. Not a step on the way to somewhere else. Not temporary housing and a strange job while I figured out the next thing. A place. The light from the back shelf caught the Vreth tokens, pale and soft. 9 small records of moments that someone thought were worth keeping. I looked at the envelope. The thing I had not been able to do, back on Earth, in any of the places I had been since, was send it. The words were right. I had written and rewritten until the words were exactly right. What I had not been able to do was make my hand carry it somewhere it would actually go. I thought about Krathvel sitting at the bar, human temperature water. He had looked it up. I thought about Siveth's frills going that deep lake bottom blue. I thought about the moose in the parking lot standing there for 4 hours, everyone just working around it, getting their groceries, getting on with things because that was what you did. You did not wait for the obstacle to move. You moved. I found the station's outgoing mail terminal at the end of the service corridor. Small screen, basic interface, designed for species with a range of different appendages. I pressed the envelope flat against the scanner. It beeped once, green light. Sending. I walked back to the bar, finished the restock, turned off the bar's primary lighting so only the ambient glow remained, that soft, variable light that made the room look like something at the bottom of a clear body of water. The Vreth tokens on the back shelf caught that light too. I turned off the last light. I went to my bunk that smelled like fermentation and old commitments. I slept. Tomorrow was a cycle night. The Meridian would be full. I had 3 new drink orders to develop, a prep sequence to correct, and a diplomatic napkin situation to sort out. One of them had been signed by a guest during last cycle, which Quelix had told me might constitute a counteroffer in some trade framework, and I needed to read the relevant manual before service. I had a job to do. I was, it turned out, very good at it. That was enough. That was, for now, exactly enough.